If he had just given us the money, none of this would have happened.
In the early hours of November 16th, 1999, Michael Kennedy pulled his car up next to Sharika Adams's black BMW. Van Brett Watkins then fired 5 shots that hit Sharika in the torso and resulted in her death. A bit over a year later, Carolina Panthers wide receiver Rae Carruth is on trial for her murder. The prosecution claims that Rae hired the 2 hitmen to kill Sharika and his unborn son. The defense says that Sharika was a victim of Watkins' anger after a drug deal gone wrong. These 2 theories form the core of the capital trial. But what happens when the primary investigative agency on the case doesn't play fair? Was Rae Carruth in essence framed by the police, and could David Rudolph prove it in court? In a criminal case, the defense is at an inherent disadvantage. The prosecution has the police force available to them to investigate their case. Even a millionaire like Rae Carruth, who is able to hire a talented defense lawyer like David Rudolph, only has a fraction of the police's resources at his disposal. But it's not a one-sided transaction. The prosecution is supposed to play fair and only present evidence they believe to be true, and only prosecute those that they think are guilty. Also, the police are not just the prosecution's private investigators. They are meant to be neutral and follow the evidence wherever it may lead. The prosecution then has an obligation to provide to the defense any evidence that would tend to show the defendant is innocent. In the case of Rae Carruth, the defense is alleging that the police were biased and that the prosecution failed to hand over exculpatory material. There was no mistrial, but the defense was allowed to present this misconduct to the jury to show that the police investigation was not objective, and thus there is a reasonable doubt as to Rae Carruth's guilt. It all started at a pre-trial hearing when the defense laid out that their theory involved a drug deal. Thus, they asked the prosecutors to provide any information they and the police department had related to the distribution of narcotics by Rae's co-defendants Watkins, Kennedy, and Abraham. D.A. Graham then told the judge that they had already provided all the information that the defense was entitled to under law. The same day that pre-trial motion took place, there was another meeting at the DA's office. Here is investigator William Ward, who was called by David Rudolph at the trial.
The purpose of the meeting with Steve Willis was to find out, I think as it's described here, whether or not the DAs wanted you to interview Thurmont Davis.
That's correct.
And he then got back to you the next day, Thursday, November 16th, did he not?
He notified me, and I can't recall whether it was by phone or I saw him in person, but he gave us the okay concerning that, yes.
And would that have been the next day, November 16th?
I believe so.
And it was Mr. Graham's advice to go and have Mr. Davis interviewed, correct?
That's correct.
And I'm sorry.
Excuse me.
And so on the 17th, which would have been a Friday, November 17th, now we're 2 days post the hearings, you went and interviewed Thurmont Dion Davis, correct?
That's correct. Investigator Connor and myself.
All right, sir. Mr. Davis gave you information about Michael Kennedy, did he not?
I believe he did, yes.
He said that he had like triple hearsay, that Michael Kennedy, somebody had told somebody's cousin that Michael Kennedy had told them that Michael Kennedy was dealing drugs with Rae Carruth, right?
He had heard it from a cousin or something, I believe.
Right, who had heard it from Michael Kennedy, supposedly, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But he had firsthand information with regard to Michael Kennedy dealing drugs, correct?
I don't recall the specifics, but that's possible.
Okay, sir. Well, for example, he said one day back in '99, Michael Kennedy came to my apartment complex and sold me a large amount of drugs, right?
That's correct.
And you asked him what kind of drugs, right?
Investigator Connor asked him.
I'm sorry. And he replied, crack cocaine, right?
Yes, sir.
And he said he sold me a large amount of drugs, and he was also giving his cousin Timothy Johnson a large amount of drugs, right?
That's correct. That's what it says.
So that would be firsthand information, would it not?
Yes, sir.
The kind of information that we were seeking in our motion, right?
I believe so, yes.
The very next day, Saturday, November 18th, you spent the entire day with Mr. Graham, the other DAs, and Michael Kennedy, did you not?
That's correct.
The purpose of and now we're like 2 or 3 days before testimonies to begin, right?
Yes, sir.
Before opening statements, right?
Yes, sir.
And the sole purpose of that meeting was to prepare Mr. Kennedy to testify, right?
I can't say what the district attorney's intent was for the meeting. We did go over transcripts. I don't want to say something I'm not aware of through the DA's office.
Fair enough. When you got there to the law enforcement center, or where you were meeting with the DAs, you spoke to Mr. Graham, did you not, about the Thurmont Davis interview?
Yes, I did.
And you asked Mr. Graham whether you should ask Mr. Kennedy any questions about his drug involvement, right?
That's correct.
Would it be fair to say that what Mr. Graham did at that point made it clear to you that he didn't want you to ask Mr. Kennedy about any drug involvement?
Concerning the hearsay of it, that's correct. Third-hand knowledge of it, yes.
Well, what about the first-hand knowledge of it? The third-hand knowledge involved Mr. Carruth, right?
That's correct.
What about the first-hand knowledge involving Michael Kennedy?
Either one, they didn't want to discuss it.
And you were concerned enough about what had happened that you went and spoke with your supervisors, weren't you?
Sergeant Athey came and asked me that evening after we spoke with Kennedy. I notified Sergeant Athey basically to tell him what went on and so on. After the motion, your motion, Sergeant Athey asked me to go ahead and supplement that information.
In other words, document what had happened.
That's correct. Concerning the questions you just asked me, yes.
Yes, sir. And that's what you did.
That's correct.
And then it went even further than that, because there was an incident that happened in court that involved me saying some things and Mr. Graham saying some things, and you then going and talking with your supervisors again, correct? Yeah. What you found out on that Monday, the 27th, well, Mr. Graham had informed the court that the 27th was the first time that they had seen this information, right? You see here, this is your report, right?
That's correct.
Done on the 5th of December,
Yes, sir.
less than a week ago. Do you see here it says, During court that Monday, that would be the 27th, David Rudolph complained about just receiving this information.
That's correct.
ADA David Graham informed the court that this was the first time that he had seen the information,
That's
that
correct.
Investigator Ward had delivered it to them at 9 a.m. and they provided it to the defense at 10 a.m.
Yes, sir.
And you then went to the law enforcement center and spoke to Sergeant Athey and Captain Mulhall about that, did you not?
That's correct.
And Sergeant Athey asked you then to talk to Mr. Graham and to remind him that, in fact, he was aware of this information because he, Mr. Graham, had told Sergeant Willis to go ahead and interview Davis, correct?
Yes, but you asked me if David Graham, that was the first time he'd seen the transcript, and that may very well be. I can't say what Mr. Graham was,
But he, yes,
what he was referring to.
but he had the information.
Concerning interviewing Davis?
Yeah.
Yes.
And indeed, you informed Sergeant Athey again that you had talked to Mr. Graham about asking Kennedy about drugs prior to the interview, right?
I had spoke to him that night about that, yes, because he had asked me to.
And then there was a meeting at the DA's office on Tuesday, day after I got this information. At that time, Sergeant Athey reminded David Graham about the information that had been provided to him on the earlier date, did they not? Did he not?
That's correct.
And you also reminded David Graham that you had asked him about talking to Kennedy about drug activity the morning of November 18th prior to the Kennedy meeting, right?
Yes, sir.
So this was of sufficient concern to you that you went to your supervisors about it, right?
I don't know that I went to them or they came to me, to be honest with you.
Well, there was concern at the police department about it.
That's correct.
So, someone, either the police or the prosecution, sat on an exculpatory report, and when it was brought up in court, Graham falsely asserted that he was seeing the Fairmont Davis information for the first time. Add on top of this that it appears that when Graham was preparing Kennedy for the trial, he intentionally didn't bring up the drug-related questions. Investigator Ward's report stated that Graham told Kennedy that they would ask him about how he makes his money when he gets on the witness stand. The argument here is that the prosecution knew that they couldn't get away with covering up Kennedy's drug dealing, so they tried to only give David Rudolph access to the information at the last possible second in the hopes that he would not be prepared to adequately cross-examine Kennedy. To be fair, the prosecution claimed that they only got the Davis transcript 1 hour before they provided it to the defense. And it is possible that Prosecutor Graham thought that all of the Davis transcript was hearsay, so there was no point in questioning Kennedy about it. A simple misunderstanding, sure, but that doesn't explain why Graham told the judge that he had never heard of the Davis information. Maybe he just forgot. This also wasn't the only example of a last-minute information dump by the prosecution.
So actually the information was that Rae was being framed, that he didn't do what they said, and that it was a drug deal that went bad.
Yes.
Do you know how many days or weeks before you interviewed Kersey that information had been given to the homicide unit?
No, I don't.
The day that you went to interview Kersey happened to be November 28th, 2000, was it not?
Yes.
That was the day that Michael Kennedy finished his testimony in this case, isn't that right?
I don't know when Michael Kennedy finished his testimony in his trial.
Well, are you aware, sir, that we didn't get this information about Deputy Kersey and this information? And by the way, he had the person's name, Nick Miller, and an address and a phone number. He gave you all that, didn't he?
Yes.
And he told you that he thought he had provided this somewhere in October or perhaps November, right?
Yes,
And he told you that this person had tried to talk to the police, but he had been coming into barricades. Didn't he tell you that?
yes,
And that he really needed to talk to somebody.
that's right.
Can you tell me, sir, why it was that you didn't go to interview Deputy Kersey until the 28th of November?
I did it when I got the information. And I did make a phone call. Sorry. I did have an investigator call him over his radio, schedule an appointment to meet, which was the following day.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it was the same day.
Okay.
It was the same day that I made contact with him, and I did interview him that day.
So then would it be fair to say then that, were you assigned this task by Sergeant Athey?
Yes,
So would it be fair to say then that the first you heard about Mr. Kersey, Deputy Kersey, was on the 28th of November from Sergeant Athey?
first I heard of Deputy Kersey, yes.
So if anyone sat on it, and I'm not saying anyone did or didn't, if they did, it wasn't you, it would have been Sergeant Athey, correct?
I'm not gonna say he sat on it, but I don't know. But it wouldn't have been me.
Okay, sir.
Investigator Connor did eventually follow the lead, and it turned out to be nothing. But it does still seem to be an example of possibly exculpatory evidence which the police delayed on. There was one more account the prosecution failed to hand over promptly, and this one turned out to be big. In fact, it was the opening line of David Rudolph's opening statement that we saw earlier. And not only was this one delayed, it was not handed over at all. This is the account of Shirley Riddle.
When I walked to his cell, he had a do-rag on his head, and I told him
What's a do-rag?
it's just a rag that they tie around their heads that they're not supposed to have. And I told him to take the do-rag off of his head. And he took it off and threw it on his bunk. And I told him no, to give it to me, because I knew he was just going to put it back on as soon as I left. And he just smiled and said, if you want it, get it. So basically, I'm the type of person, you don't show fear around inmates, so I stepped inside of his cell to retrieve the do-rag.
What happened?
He placed his hand on the door frame, kind of like blocking my exit, but he wasn't really intimidating. He was more in a joking way.
And then what happened?
He said, Sergeant Riddle, he said, I got to talk to you. And Mr. Watkins appeared to be upset. And I asked him, first he said, I shot that girl. And I stopped him. I said, Mr. Watkins, you know, you're not supposed to talk to me about this stuff. I said, you're upset. Can I call mental health for you, get mental health up here? And he said, no, they can't help me. And I asked him, did he want me to call the nurse? And he said, nurse couldn't help him. So I asked him, did he want me to call the chaplain? And he said, you know, I'm a Muslim, and you don't have a Muslim chaplain. And he just started talking. He said, Sergeant Riddle, he said, I told Kennedy to pull up beside of Sharika's car. He said, we'd lost track of Rae. We wanted to see which way he was headed. And he said, I started waving my arms to get her to slow down. He said, we were just going to ask her if she knew where Rae was going. He said, then she slowed down. He said, I think she may have thought that we wanted to pass her. He said, and he was motioning. He said, I was telling her to roll her window down so we could talk to her. He said, and when she looked over and seen who he was, she flipped me off. And he said, Sergeant Riddle, I just lost it. I lost control. He said, I just started shooting. And then he said, Sergeant Riddle, it was Rae's fault. If he had just given us the money, none of this would have happened.
Sergeant Riddle also had another interaction with Watkins relevant to this case. This happened after Sharika died and Watkins was charged with murder.
While Mr. Watkins was in the arrest processing area, did he make any requests of you?
He asked me and Sergeant Bryant if he could use the telephone.
Was he allowed to do so?
Yes, he was.
And again, I'd like you to sort of relax and take a look at the jury, and please explain to them what happened on that occasion. Keep your voice up if you can.
Okay, he tried to make one call, and he said that there was no one at home, and he asked, he said that didn't count, could he make another call? And we told him to go ahead. And he made another call to, I have no idea who it was he was talking to. And in his conversation, he's very loud, and I could overhear what he was saying. And he said, he told them that he had tried to call Candace, but she wasn't at home. And Candace.
Okay.
And she wasn't at home, that he wanted him to get in touch with her and tell her to keep her mouth shut, that the police would probably be coming around to talk to her, and for her not to say anything. He said that the police would probably be coming around to talk to them, not to say anything, for them not to say anything to him. And he told him to be sure to get up with Candace and tell her that if she cared anything at all about Michael, that she'd keep her mouth shut. And he said, tell her that if Oprah calls, he said, tell her if Oprah calls, tell Oprah to call me, that I'll tell her everything. And he was laughing about this.
So first of all, we have a confession from Watkins about what apparently happened on the night of the murder. This account also clearly excludes Rae having any involvement in Sharika's death. And all of this is coming from a prison officer with no involvement in the case. That certainly helps Rae's defense. Add to this how well the account fits with other evidence in the case. The story paints Watkins as a short-tempered madman who shot Sharika in anger after she flipped him off. It would be hard to believe that someone would resort to murder over such a small personal slight. But Watkins had already testified. On the stand, he snapped and basically threatened to kill David Rudolph with his bare hands. Riddle's story fits with Watkins's character in a way that would not be true for anybody else in the case. If you want to see Watkins threatening David Rudolph yourself, you can go to the Court TV website and watch his testimony. I also covered his outburst in part 1 of this 4-part series. If you are enjoying the video and don't want to miss the final part, then be sure to subscribe. Also, if you appreciate this in-depth analysis of the trial and you think that other people would enjoy it too, then leave a like and a comment. That helps YouTube to recommend this content to more people. Thank you, and back to the trial. As if Riddle testifying to Watkins's prior confession wasn't enough, she also described Watkins threatening Candace through an intermediary and telling her not to talk to the police. Candace testified that she didn't really know Watkins and that he certainly never called her from prison. Riddle's information would be a potential motive to lie for the prosecution's apparently most unbiased witness. Candace Smith testified that Rae Carruth confessed to her that he had had Sharika shot. If perhaps Candace actually lied because Michael was being threatened, then the prosecution have very little left to get a conviction. Sergeant Riddle's testimony undermined 2 of the prosecution's key witnesses. Maybe that is why it was attempted to cover it up. After both Watkins's confession in the cell and the phone call, Riddle took notes on the event. Weeks later, she found out from Rae that there was a Candace relevant to the case. Thus, she created a report on what she overheard and went to her direct supervisor, Captain Farrell.
He was, he got pretty upset with me about it. He said that, did I know what that was going to do? Did I know how the administration was going to come down on me? He said, do you know what that's going to do to your chances to become a captain? Do you know what Chief Morley is going to do to you? It made me very apprehensive about doing the report.
And as a result of that, what did you say to him?
I asked him if it would be okay with him if I talked to Commander Treadway, since we had a situation in the jail, a case that we were working on in-house, that I needed to talk to him about anyway. And he told me, yes, go ahead. Well, first he asked me, he said, would you be comfortable talking with Captain Farrell about Commander Treadway about something like this? And I told him I'd talk to Commander Treadway about anything.
And would Commander Treadway be someone who was higher up in the chain of command at the Sheriff's Department than the captain or other people that you could have talked with?
Yes, sir. And I told him, I said, Commander Treadway, I said, I've got an incident report that I'd like to read to you, and I'd like your advice on what to do about it.
And what happened then?
I read him the incident report that I had prepared.
And did he then give you any advice that you acted upon in terms of what you did with the incident report?
He said, no, don't turn that in. He said, from all the phone calls that was made, I think this case is pretty well wrapped up. This is something that could be subpoenaed, and I don't think that we need to get involved in this. I asked him, do you not think that the police needs to talk to this girl, Candace? And he said that he imagined that they had already talked to her.
By the way, do you know who Commander Treadway had worked for before he went to the Sheriff's Department?
He had worked for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department.
Had he been in charge of the division that included the homicide unit?
Sir, I do not know.
Okay. After Commander Treadway told you that, what did you do with this particular report?
But the report was in Captain Farrell's possession. Captain Farrell asked me what did he say, and I told him that he said not to turn it in.
Was this report filed in the way that incident reports are normally filed in the Sheriff's Department?
No, sir, it was not.
What happened with this report?
It was put into a yellow manila envelope and put in Captain Farrell's drawer.
If this report wasn't gotten through discovery, how did the defense find out about it? For that, we have Sergeant Stamps. Sergeant Riddle approached him after a supervisor's meeting and told him about the suppressed report.
She was really distraught about the fact that she had this information and that she didn't know what she should do with it next, that she was told that she couldn't do anything with it, that she shouldn't do anything with it, that she should keep it because the sheriff had made a statement in one of our sergeants' meetings that if you destroy or you throw away an incident report, that he'll fire you.
And what was her concern, both with regard to herself and, if any, with regard to Commander Treadway?
She really liked Commander Treadway, and she didn't want anything to happen to him. And she knew that this information needed to come out, but that if it came out, that she would be fired. Well, I told her that that this needed to come out, that we couldn't wait. We couldn't wait any longer on it. That something had to be done right now, and that I was going to go to you and with the information.
Why was it that you decided to do that as opposed to either going to people at the Sheriff's Department or going to the Police Department?
Well, Commander Treadway is head of internal affairs, and he's been with.
Keep your voice.
I'm sorry. Commander Treadway's been with Internal Affairs for a number of years. He's also got over 30 years of experience. I didn't believe, because he was involved, that we needed to go through him, and that I didn't believe that the sheriff or anybody in the agency would believe us over Commander Treadway. And I had prior experience with Commander Treadway, and I didn't believe that he would believe the information I had to say.
What about the police department?
We had talked about going to the police department, going to the DA with the information, but they would end up going back to Commander Treadway, and we'd be right back where we started from.
What did you do then? Wait, is this something that Sergeant Riddle asked you to do, or is this something that you did on your own?
I did it on my own.
All right, please explain to the jury.
I told her that I was going to go to Mr. Rudolph with the information, that I felt that if he had the information, that she stood a better chance of keeping her job. That way more people knew about it than just our agency. So I told her I was going to contact him, and I believe that was on a Tuesday, and then Wednesday I happened to run into Mr. Rudolph in the lobby. He was, I think he was just getting done visiting with his client.
Now, just so we're all clear, did you and I have any kind of a prior relationship before I started representing Mr. Carruth?
No, sir.
Have we ever had any relationship other than the fact that I would contact you if I needed to set up a face-to-face visit with him, and you would do that for me the way you would do it for any other lawyer?
No, sir.
Have we ever had any kind of social contact or anything like that?
No, sir.
Right. Could you tell the members of the jury what happened when you saw me that day at the jail?
I asked him if he would step outside to the public entrance, which is on the backside of the of Jail Central. At that time, I asked him, I said, I may have some information that may be important to the case, but that I'm not going to tell you anything about it unless you can tell me a little bit about the case. If it matches up at all, then I'll tell you what I know. Other than that, I'm not going to tell you.
And what were you thinking about in terms of trying to get information from me about whether it would match up or not?
Well, me and Sergeant Riddle had discussed this, and based on the information that was given to her by inmate Watkins, we had come to some conclusion that there may be drugs involved. It may have been something.
Could you explain to the members of the jury what you asked me and what I told you, and what you did in response to what I told you?
I asked, would you please tell me a little bit about what's going on? I said, I don't want a lot of details. All I want to know is what the basis of what you're going to do as far as your part of the defense. And he said that Mr. Rudolph told me that.
Well, members of the jury, this is not offer for the truth of what was stated, but to show why the witness did or said what he did there.
He told me that Watkins, that Rae decided that he didn't want to have anything to do with the drugs, and that he wasn't going to finance Watkins any money.
After I told you that, what happened?
I told you that I went into detail about the incident report. I went into detail about the statements that were made to this individual, but I still refuse to tell you who it was.
In terms of the prosecution defending themselves in relation to suppressing the report, they didn't really focus on that. They said either there was no report and Sergeant Riddle is lying about that, or the blame falls at the feet of Commander Treadway and the prosecution didn't call him so he could rehabilitate his character. To be fair, the report Treadway received was only related to Watkins's phone call, which Shirley Riddle overheard, and there was another jailer present who didn't hear what Watkins said. So maybe the call was actually nothing, and Riddle just misunderstood some things. Having said that, It probably would have been nice to have someone deny that Treadway intentionally suppressed the report because it could be subpoenaed. Either way, clearly the prosecution had other priorities. They needed to undermine Shirley Riddle's claim about Watkins's confession and the allegation that Rae wasn't involved in the murder. Well, Shirley Riddle must have been influenced by Rae Carruth to invent this story. Major Felicia McAdoo had very often seen Sergeant Riddle escorting Rae around the jail. After McAdoo spoke to Riddle's direct superior and he told her that he had no idea why Riddle was constantly escorting Rae, she approached Riddle directly. Riddle told her that Rae was more comfortable with her than the other jailers, so she would often escort him. McAdoo, possibly suspicious that something was going on, moved Riddle onto a different shift. Major McAdoo also claimed that Shirley Riddle had some instances of being untruthful, so it was best not to have her around high-profile inmates. Kimberly Young was a jailer working under Riddle and McAdoo. One day, she was working in Rae Carruth's pod where he was being held under supervision. Sergeant Riddle came in and told Young she needed to talk to Rae. Riddle then told Young to take a break and there was no need to sign her into the logbook. That logbook needed to be signed by anybody entering the pod. Very suspicious. So, was Sergeant Riddle making things up to help Rae Carruth? The prosecution certainly wants us to think so. But David Rudolph had some pretty effective counterpoints to these attacks. First, there was a completely innocent explanation for the jail pod interaction Officer Young testified to. Rae Carruth was under self-deletion protocol, and he didn't think that was necessary, so he filed a complaint. Later that day, Shirley Riddle came to the pod since as the floor supervisor, she would have been responsible for handling that grievance. She then asked Officer Young to leave so that she could have more privacy to discuss the sensitive portions of Rae's complaint. The result of that meeting was that Rae went off the supervision. Also, David Rudolph found the logbook, and right there, clear as day, it says that Sergeant Riddle was present in the pod. There was nothing strange going on in the way that Young implied. McAdoo claimed that she thought that Riddle was escorting Rae a suspicious number of times, but she had previously talked to the police about that, and she didn't exactly tell the same thing to them as when she testified in court.
And do you remember saying to Captain Hawes on October 5th, quote, and she at one point worked the second floor with Rae Carruth. She was escorting Carruth a lot and I noticed it. Every time I would go in or come out of my office and saw her on the hall with him. That's the 3 times you testified about here today?
I saw her at different times, so that was a part of the statement, yes.
Yeah. I questioned Farrell about it. I said, why is it that this woman is constantly escorting this particular inmate? And he said, you know, because of the high profile, we are using sergeants. Remember saying that? You were also asked about that by Investigator Ward, weren't you?
Yes.
You recognize him, right?
I do.
He interviewed you 5 days after Captain Hawes, right?
That's correct.
He asked you about when you had confronted Sergeant Riddle about talking to these people, meaning a reference to not just Mr. Carruth, but all the co-defendants, right?
I would assume I have no idea.
Well, do you remember saying at that time, quote, Rae Carruth is housed in that area, and I had seen her frequently walking from his cell and escorting him. And I made mention to Captain Farrell at that point that I had seen her up there, And I asked him, I said, what's she doing up there and why is she walking with this man? And he said, well, she is assigned to the second floor. And of course, the sergeants were doing the escorting on those particular inmates, meaning Mr. Carruth and his co-defendants, because of the high-profile nature and the fact that we didn't want the staff to get with these people and begin to talk about what was going on in this case. At that point, he said to me, you know, that's all she's doing. And I said, well, if that's the case, I'd like for you to move her because she has a reputation of getting around inmates and talking with them, and she will probably talk to this man about his case if she is put in that position. I don't want her being around him or even being put in that position. You need to move her and make sure that she's not anywhere near him, so that possibility doesn't even come up. Remember saying that?
Yes, that's in the statement, yes.
McAdoo also isn't unbiased in this case. She sent out a directive that all law enforcement called by the defense were not to testify in their uniforms. I guess this was a way to deprive the defense of the inherent credibility a police uniform gives someone when they testify. McAdoo is also entitled to think that Riddle is a liar, but that doesn't mean she is being dishonest in this case. Nobody disputes that Riddle didn't want to be called to testify, and she was clearly afraid of the damage to her career resulting from disclosing the information on a case that at least Commander Treadaway thought was all wrapped up. When the defense's investigator, Ron Jarrett, approached Riddle, she refused to talk to him. And when she was summoned to testify, she went to Major McAdoo to try and get out of it. But even if Riddle is telling the truth and Watkins told her about shooting Sharika, that doesn't mean that it's true. Riddle clearly laid out in court that when Watkins first confessed to her, she thought he was trying to use her for an insanity defense. In Watkins' story, he was so enraged by being flipped off by Sharika that he shot her. This tale of Watkins being somebody with anger issues who just isn't able to control himself plays much more kindly than somebody who was paid months before to carry out first-degree premeditated murder. Maybe Watkins was trying to play the system to get back into a psych ward like he did in New York. If that was the case, then Riddle did her job. She didn't take his fake claims of being crazy seriously. She didn't let him abuse the system. But did the other investigators in this case do their jobs? The defense certainly doesn't think so. I want to just go back to something that Commander Treadaway allegedly said. When Sergeant Riddle came to him and informed him that the police might want to talk to Candace Smith, he said that the police had found their culprits and the case was all tied up. It's the exact same kind of mentality that led to prosecutors not asking Kennedy any questions about drugs. They had the case all tied up. Rae Carruth was guilty, and any drug evidence, even if it were true, would only confuse the jury or falsely make Rae look innocent. Why follow up on Deputy Kersey's lead? It would just give the defense more ammo to cross-examine Kennedy about drugs, and drugs have nothing to do with this case. Now, it is bad for the police not to be following leads during the trial. They should be impartially investigating as much as they can. But the real problem is if there is bias from the start. If the police only follow leads that would tend to incriminate Rae Carruth, then one is left with a picture that he must be guilty. The murder did happen, and all of the evidence the police has points at Rae, so he must be guilty. We will never know what would have happened if the police had followed different directions in their investigation from the start. because ever since they received the 911 call reporting the shots, the police were focused on Rae Carruth. Even before Rae arrived at the hospital, there was a police all-points bulletin out looking for him. As part of this, the police had contacted the head of Panther Security. They told him that Rae got into an argument with his girlfriend and shot her. That was their conclusion before talking to Kennedy, before talking to Watkins. In fact, it was before talking to any of the witnesses at the trial. The police clearly, from the start, were only looking at one thing. Not truth, not justice, just Rae Carruth. So, did the police frame Rae Carruth? No. Even the defense at their strongest is only alleging that the police were too focused on Rae from the start and that they were careless in their handling of Kennedy and Watkins in such a way that they were able to construct a fake story and put the blame on Rae. But nobody is supposing that the police were fabricating evidence or trying to convict Rae even though they knew he was innocent. As for Riddle's suppressed evidence, that's clearly bad. If the defense hadn't gotten it directly from Sergeant Stamps and it was presented in front of the right judge, it might even be enough to overturn a conviction. But it's still a good bit short of Rae Carruth being framed by the police. This was a big case, and some leads are going to be failed to be followed up on. There will be misunderstandings between prosecutors and the police, and prosecutors can forget conversations they had and inadvertently mislead the judge. Some of the timings of certain occurrences in this case do make it look like the prosecution didn't want Kennedy cross-examined on certain things. But in life, coincidences do happen. The investigation and prosecution of Rae Carruth was flawed. But all human endeavors are flawed. The police were very focused on Rae from the start, but they had a good reason to be.
911 Baker, you need police, fire, or medic?
Police, I've been shot.